Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Business Mastery Podcast. That's right. Just to remind you again, we've rebranded, no longer Profit Accelerator, although today we are going to be talking about some pretty important things around money. But these things will take your business to the next level, and it is something where you do need to gain some business mastery. So, Jose, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, Dawn. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me on your show.
All right. Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Well, I am an entrepreneur. I live in Houston, Texas. I'm originally from Mexico City, but I've been in Texas now for several decades, close to 40 years, in which all of them, I have been an entrepreneur. I started business as soon as I got here to go to the University of St. Thomas. So I was one of those few crazy people that was starting a business simultaneously as I was starting to go to college. So my life has been busy, to say the least. But I'm glad, in retrospect, I'm glad I did it because my entire career has been entrepreneurship. From one business to another. A good chunk of that, I have been in real estate, in building homes for single-family residential developments, done those by the tons. I've owned several construction companies, and in many, many other businesses in different sectors. So proud to say I've been not a one-hit wonder, but one of those entrepreneurs that it's mostly hard work and very little talent. And the perseverance has gotten me here.
I love that. All right. So the reason we're bringing you on, and we talked about this when we were designing this episode, was you have so much experience in when you need a partner or when you need an investor or when you should take a loan yourself or when you are ready to grow your business, what the considerations are that you made in deciding which way to go. And most of us, in the beginning anyway, try to bootstrap our businesses because we'll start with something we're passionate about, right? We'll find a little audience, we'll make a few sales, and then all of a sudden, boom, we have a business, we need to grow. But you can't necessarily always grow by yourself taking loans. Sometimes you don't have expertise, you need a partner. Sometimes you need an investor who's going to be maybe a little hands-off and sort of just be the money backer. So want to dive into that with you. And, let's just first start. When does a business owner need to consider one of these three avenues of capital for growth?
Well, this is a wonderful topic that I've spent many, many years working on. Partners, investors, lenders. And let's start by saying that every single business, even within the same industry, are very different. They have their own characteristics, their own mission, their own objectives. So it's a very broad, very wide topic. Let's talk about the ones who want to grow, because this is truly where it kicks in. I think it's relatively easy for a small business to remain at a decent size, at a steady pace. But when one begins to consider to get that itch to grow, to expand, to multiply, to gain more markets, so on and so forth, this is when it starts getting interesting, because it is very difficult to extract cash from a small business in order to grow. Okay, there's just not enough cash to go around. You either have enough cash to operate, to pay your bills, to maintain the operation, to maybe make a little bit of a profit, but enough to reinvest in order to expand. It's rarely when it happens. So at some point, you have to go outside of your business to start attracting capital. And there are two main important ways of going about it. Either borrowing it is one, or number two is bringing in an investor, a partner. Let's differentiate the fundamental differences between those two. A partner, obviously, by definition, is going to come in and own essentially a percentage of your business via profits or via stock or whatever type of deal you negotiate with your partner/investor. So investors are always going to cost more money when you bring them in. But here's the beauty in a partner. A partner is flexible, is available, is open to working as you go, tweaking things, perfecting things as you go, as the business needs more capital, as the business needs some flexibility in repaying that investment. The investors are in it with you. Because if you make money, the investor makes money. If the business succeeds, the investor succeeds. Now, as far as a lender, those lenders are less expensive. A lender, really what they want is safety. They want a smaller return, but they want their investment to be secure. They're going to want more collateral. They're going to take less risk. So those are the main differences. To answer the question as to when, the business is going to dictate at what point in time you just need capital in order to achieve your short-term and long-term needs. So that's one decision that you need to make. Lenders obviously are going to provide you with capital with a lot more restrictions, with a lot more limitations, guidelines, procedures, deadlines, maturity dates, covenants, so on and so forth. But this capital, of course, is less expensive. You don't have to give away a portion of your business.
Right.
So those are the important differences.
Awesome. So let's just talk about like SBA loans, for example, right? So when you're talking about covenants and restrictions, a lot of times when the bank gives you the money, the SBA is backing that. So you still have to qualify for the loan with the actual bank that will be lending it. And then it's just kind of government secured. But the government does want that collateral, don't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, great question. And these are very useful types of loans. And as you mentioned, they are secure. They are collateralized by your assets, but guaranteed by the government. So if you qualify, the bank will approve it because they know that if anything goes wrong, the government will step in and pay for the loan. However, yes, you're right. The government you're going to have to go through a process, and most likely the business is going to have some tangible assets for you to get one of those. When it's smaller amounts, there are ways to go around it, and you can prove it via income and via a number of other ways. But once you start getting into a certain amount of dollars, you either have to have some real estate behind it or a lot of assets that can give the loan a comfort level that you have skin in the game and that they're not going to lose their money without you putting enough effort before the business goes bad.
So that's an interesting thing. So again, the flexibility, and we'll talk about the partnership here in a minute, but really when the business is loaned money traditionally through the Small Business Administration or through a regional or a large bank loan, they're not actually invested in your success in any way. They just want their money back. So if you start to flounder, really all they're looking for is that security. Have you ever worked with a bank that sat down with you and ran financials and helped you make business decisions while they're giving you money?
Well, not exactly. They don't make business decisions with you or for you as a team, as a partner would do. But they do want to understand what you're doing. A bank is not going to decide, but they are going to question you, your judgment, your business plan, your financials. What is ensuring that you're going to repay this loan? A bank is more, as you said, they're much more worried about getting repaid and making a little bit of money than to make a lot of money, but they don't want to risk. They are risk adverse. Lenders, banks, they want to help you be able to perform and execute your business, but they want to do it with the minimum amount of risk. There's a lot of people say, well, banks don't lend you money they'll lend you money once you almost don't need it, once you have enough of it.
Right.
And yes, you have to have some money, some collateral, good credit, a number of things before they lend you the money. But they will assist you in growing because there are many ways, there are many types of loans and ways to go about it, but they want to be repaid. And the good news is that they're very inexpensive. Once you pay them back and pay them their interest, you own 100% of your business. They don't want shares. They don't want to tell you how to run the business. They're not going to really get involved in how you operate it at all. But they are going to be monitoring your financial condition, personal and business-wise, to make sure that you are executing the business the way that you explained it and the way that you originally intended to.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about a bank loan that goes to a company directly and a bank loan that has like a personal guarantee behind it as well. I think that's a consideration for business owners, is who actually borrowed the money.
Absolutely. The person or the entity behind the loan is very important to a bank. It is not just about lending money to someone who's financially strong, but they also want to know that you know what you're doing, that you understand your business, and that you have an exit strategy, meaning a way to repay your loan. So they are going to look into your finances. They're going to look into your credit. They're going to evaluate you as a package and understand your financial position and the financial position of your business. So yes, every situation and every loan is slightly different. By the way, the same goes for banks. Lenders, they all have different philosophies, different ways of operating. They have different systems in place in ways in which their board, their team, the examiners approve and evaluate the deals. So don't be surprised. I always tell people that are starting in business that if you get turned down by 1 or 2 or 3 banks, don't give up. It doesn't mean that your business is bad. All it means is that maybe your type of business or your type of loan wasn't of interest to them, or maybe at that particular moment, their appetite for your industry or for your type of loan wasn't there, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good deal. It's sort of like finding a record label, to pick you up, or a publisher to pick up your book. You have to knock on doors. Now, with that being said, what I've learned over the years is if I ever get rejected, particularly in my earlier exercises and in the earlier years of my career, I often got rejected by a number of banks and a number of transactions. But I would always try to learn what was it that they didn't like about my presentation, about my loan request. And that way, I would learn a little bit about the reasoning behind approvals and rejections. And it would help me not only understand if it was something that I did wrong, or if it was simply that the bank was not attracted to that type of industry or that type of deal. And I would start tweaking and perfecting my deals, whether they wanted more collateral, whether they wanted more equity, whether they wanted a guarantor, which gets me back to part of your question. The banks are always going to want personal guarantees unless you are already a very big firm with a lot of history, with a lot of experience, with very deep pockets, deep financial statements and balance sheets that can support themselves. They will want you to guarantee the loan personally, which means that if the business fails, they go after you personally and go after your personal assets to recover their loan and to save their money as additional protection. If there is no personal guarantee, that means that your business can obtain a loan. And if something goes wrong with a loan or with a company, they won't come after you. But normally they will not issue a loan without a personal guarantee unless the business is very strong.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I think this is the first time that I'm hearing maybe the entrepreneur should do some due diligence before a pitch about maybe you can, banks sometimes will advertise their success stories and the types of businesses they've loaned money to, especially some of the smaller banks. And they'll say, yeah, we helped, this nursery business, expand, or we helped this, or we helped that. I wonder if it's not worth the time or what your thoughts are about interviewing bankers before you have run a credit check.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Great question. And it's very important. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you a quick story. My credit, my personal credit should be immaculate. It should be perfect. But as we all know, every time someone checks on your credit, it drops a few points.
Right.
So when you are shopping for loans, your bank starts dropping. Credit scores assume that you're in a buying spree, and it affects your credit. So you don't want, the point back to your question, you don't want banks to start running your credit without you really understanding if it's a right match. I work with a lot of banks. I have a lot of lines of credit, and they regularly have to be updating my financials and approvals and renewals. So they keep checking on my credit, which affects it, which is ironic. I don't have any reason for my credit not to be perfect, but the fact that they keep checking it at every board meeting, it affects it. So be careful with that. Make sure that by the time you give the bank the green light to check on your credit and start the loan approval, that you also done your due diligence and interview them and understood. It doesn't cost them anything to reject your loan, but it costs you a lot of time, and perhaps it affects your credit, it affects your morale, it affects your ability to have spent that amount of time going to another lender. So absolutely, ask a little bit about them. What are they lending? Is your industry something that is attracted to them? Is your type of business? Are the terms that you're thinking about proposing sensible? Do they make logic and sense to them according to what you're going to present? Otherwise, don't waste your time and move on to another one.
So a commercial banker, right? Not a personal banker. You're going to want to talk to the commercial side of the house, particularly if you're starting out, right? You want to, I mean, can you just generally make an appointment and sit down with a banker and give them the idea without filling out the paperwork? Or do they usually want you to commit to saying, if we say yes, you'll take it? I know it's a business. Banking is a business.
Absolutely. That is a wonderful question, because I talk a lot about how to start your first loan is always the most difficult one. Like everything else in life, opening the door to a bank is very difficult. And here's my recommendation. Do not walk in or cold call a bank. They are not crazy about it. No bank, whether it's local, community, regional, or national, they will historically and naturally not treat you the same if you just walk in out of nowhere than if you're referred. It's almost like going on a first date. It's not the same walking up to someone on the street and ask them to go out with you as it is to be properly introduced to someone. When you get properly introduced to a banker, they immediately give you that respect, the time, the perhaps a little more understanding and appreciation of where you come from. And now you come in with some references, which is what gives you a little bit more bargaining tools and perhaps seriousness. So I always recommend that if you are starting and you don't have any relationships, family and friends, ask your family, ask your friends, do you know of a good banker, a commercial banker? Can you introduce me? Can you set up an appointment? Can you call them on my behalf? That will go a long way. Also, if you already have an account somewhere and you're already working with a bank, start there. That's how I started. My first loan, I went to the bank where I already had my checking account. Incidentally, that was not the bank who gave me my first loan, but they recommended me to another bank that actually did those kinds of loans. So work by referral and recommendation. Don't just walk in out of nowhere and introduce yourself. Although, yes, they're not going to kick you out and they don't have bouncers necessarily. It just doesn't give them a good taste in the whole experience of you coming out of nowhere and not knowing a little bit about you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, to the audience, I think this also takes away, if you've never applied for a bank loan before, maybe you've been bootstrapping for years or just reinvesting and you're ready to take the next step. I don't think people talk about it this way. And we do take it so personally if we get rejected for a bank loan. And I think it's on the personal level too, right? You go to buy a car, you get rejected, or you go to buy a house or whatever it is that you're trying to buy and you're trying to use someone else's money. I think that we take it personally as if our idea isn't good, or I don't know that anybody's ever sat down and said, look, banks have risk tolerance. You're a small business. Small businesses have to prove themselves out in the world, and it's not personal. And if you do it this way or consider these things, you'll have a better chance of success. So I appreciate you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do not get your feelings hurt if you get rejected or if they don't like your deal. Even now, after I've done thousands of transactions and hundreds of millions of dollars in business transactions and loans, believe it or not, I still get rejected, politely rejected. As in, there are institutions where I'm working on a deal and they simply don't have the appetite at that particular moment in time for your deal. It happens all the time. Do not get discouraged. Do not get bothered by it. Understand why. Also, every bank, even every branch, every region has limitations and has different policies and different amounts and different quotas. Here's another big one. Sometimes they have quotas for real estate or for startups or for any type of industry. And maybe they have too much on their books within your particular business or industry. So at that point, they just don't want any more because they're also trying to diversify their risk. So you're very right. Do not get emotional about it. Don't get hurt by getting rejected. Just move on and keep working on it.
Yeah, that's so important that the loan they might have given you 6 months ago may not be the loan they would give you today, and it may not have anything at all to do with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't think that's a perspective that's really spoken a lot about in the small business community, about the timing of the bank and the timing of industry and the economy at large. And you'll hear things on the news about interest rates going up and down or people tightening or opening lending. But I don't know that we really discuss it enough that it's like, hey, you just have too much real estate on the books. We're not doing any more real estate. You have too much, ag on the books. We're not doing any more agriculture. Or we have too much small business. That's a real thing for them to consider, isn't it?
Yes, it's not something to really consider. You have to investigate a little further. I'm going to take it even further. I've been fired by banks after, and hear this out, after I have been performing, paying my interest like clockwork, growing, executing my business to perfection, and doing my part. I have had banks that come to me and say, I am sorry, but we're going to have to get paid off. We're going to have to terminate these loans as soon as they get paid off. We're not going to renew them. And little by little, I've learned over the years that it has nothing to do with me or with my business. Sometimes their policies and their philosophies change. It comes from corporate. It comes from economic changes. They forecast something to be changing in the environment, whether it's global, national, or even within your niche market. So I've had bankers that come to me, even particularly during difficult cycles, that come to me and say, hey, nothing to do with you, but unfortunately, we're going to exit your market temporarily. So we just need to get paid off. That's a tough day, obviously, depending on those loans. And now you have to go shop for another bank to replace those loans. That's a whole nother, perhaps a little more advanced to some of the audience who is trying to get the first loan. But just be prepared for anything. Everything is possible. And you just have to be ready for it.
Yeah, so important. Okay, so we've talked about banks, whether it's your first loan or your 50th loan. You have considerations, but they also have considerations that I think it's great to really bring out and explain to business owners that, it's not just you. It's not just your idea. It's not just your balance sheet. It could just be not now, not no. Right? All right. So
absolutely. Yes, correct.
Let's go to partnerships, because you were saying they're much more flexible. They're invested in your success. There's a downside, though, about it's a little more expensive. Talk about partnerships, and have you done deals with partners that took equity for a while, you paid them back, they exited? Let's talk about the negotiations and things that maybe a partner can benefit you for.
Absolutely. Partners are a completely different. It's money at the end of the day. They're also contributing their hard-earned dollars. They also want to be cautious. They also want to ensure that they don't lose their money, but they are willing to take a little bit more risk. Investors are normally bringing money that it's excess capital that they need to park, that they want to profit out of, that they want to multiply. And normally they will be willing to take a little more risk than the bank, sometimes a lot more risk. So the rule of thumb is that the more risk they're taking on, the more return they will want, the bigger the percentage. And the risk is calculated by a number of factors. The type of deal, the amount of money they're putting in relation to the size of the deal, the experience that you bring in yourself and your team, the market conditions, the type of industry, how new, how innovative, how proven your concept is. So all of those things are going to be evaluated by the investor. And the savvier and the more experienced the investor is, the more they're going to be willing, they're going to do their due diligence and examine the transaction. There are some investments that are very cookie cutter. There are numbers, there are projections, there are financials, and normally they are within certain parameters. There are some others that are highly speculative, like technology deals, like startups, like concepts that have not yet been proven, like restaurants that, hey, you're going to find out when you open the doors, there's no rhyme or reason whether one works versus the other. So the level of risk is going to play a big part. Also, how you present it and the experience that the investor has. You want to be fair, but you also don't want to give up more equity than necessary. Again, every business and every transaction is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes you can get a partner on a transaction basis. Let's say I'm going to open one restaurant, or I'm going to do one construction development, and they become partners on that particular deal. Some others are going to say, no, I want every future deal. I'm going to get in the ground level with you, and I want a fraction, a percentage of your business, of everything that you do. So you have to pay very close attention to what it is that you want out of your business. How much are you willing to give up? And what is going to be the benefit of bringing in those dollars versus borrowing them? There are instances, remember that banks don't like every type of deal, and not every deal suits the needs and requirements of a bank. There are some where it absolutely needs an investor, because an investor is not going to go strictly by the book. They're not going to go strictly by your tax returns and your balance sheet and your financials and the numbers. They're going to be much more open-minded because they can be sold on a promise, on a vision, on a concept. Investors want to make a bunch of money. They see the opportunity together with you. A bank doesn't care about the opportunity. They have a business which is to get a return. So they're very, very different. Again, it's money at the end of the day, but it's raised differently and it's utilized and repaid differently. Here's another one. Investors, let's say that you have a bad year or a bad quarter, or the business results are delayed by X number of months, years, so on and so forth. An investor's interest is to work with you, to be patient, to help you succeed, because if you fail, they lose their money. A bank does not have that flexibility. The interest payment is due every month religiously without exceptions, when it matures and when it has to be renewed and when it is time to repay. All of those guidelines, covenants, and rules are not flexible. It is what it is. I don't care how well you get along with your officer, with your banker, with your lender. It's beyond their control. It's the way the bank works. With an investor, here's the beauty. You can sit down with him or her, explain the situation. Now you're talking to a person, not a system. And that person can work with you and either agree, disagree, perhaps negotiate, say, all right, I will do this. I will give you more time if you do this and that, and so on and so forth. It's an individual that wins when you win. So it's not to their best interest to squeeze you to a point where you're going to lose your business.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting when you were talking about, the risk tolerance of investors, there's probably dollar amounts available across the spectrum as well. Somebody who will give you 5 or 10,000 versus someone who will give you 100 million. And, understanding that there's likely an investor out there. I think there used to be a website that would match small dollar investors to startup businesses. I don't remember the name of it. I don't even know if it's still around, but I believe prior to COVID, you could even get, investors at very small dollar amounts. And then once you paid them back, they would exit. They were holding the collateral of the equity, and then they would just turn that back over to you. What do you think of those kinds of deals for somebody who's maybe bootstrapping, now they need their first true 100 grand?
Well, that's an interesting subject because you have to evaluate what it is that you want the money and for how long, and how much risk you want to take. Let's put aside the risk that the investor is taking or the lender.
Okay.
Let's talk about the risk that you are acquiring by taking on a loan. Let's say that you're buying a property for $100,000 and you need someone to come in with the equity with $20,000. Okay. If that investor puts in the equity and somehow they, at some point, the deals go bad and they take over the loan, you may lose your portion and you may lose your business. There are loans where the borrower, it's also at some level of risk because the lender can put you in a difficult position. So you have to make sure that before you borrow the money or before you go on to an investor, you don't give them too much control, too many decisions, that the terms and conditions give you the freedom, let's say, to operate the business so that you don't put yourself at risk of promising certain things that later are going to backfire. There are different platforms. Speaking of the types of loans, you are correct. Now in the world of information that we live in, and the fact that things have gotten a little more flexible with the limitations of the lending world, there are things such as crowdfunding, for example, where you can raise smaller amounts of capital from individuals. There are platforms that connect businesses and the creators with the investors, and those are very helpful for a lot of examples. So if you are putting something together and need smaller amounts, my advice is always go to people that know you, that trust you. Once you have the credibility of being a responsible, hardworking person that handles business properly, it is not that difficult to go to the people that know you, that understand your work ethic, and help you raise that money. Now, when you start talking about bigger amounts, yes, you're going to have to start giving up more equity and to start having to have a little more credibility. But there are a number of mechanisms and methods and platforms to raise capital for the different types of businesses.
Yeah, so important. And I'm really glad that you put it kind of back on the entrepreneur to also check your own risk, because we get excited. We want to go do the next thing. We have this idea, want to go get the money, and we could end up in a bad deal. So let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, the lawyers, when you're doing some of these deals. So the banks, generally you go to a bank, you don't bring your lawyer with you. Generally, the terms are pretty simple. There's a lot of regulation about how they have to tell you what the interest rate is, what the payments are, and all the things. Tons and tons of regulations regulating the banks, but not so in investing, right? When somebody is investing with you, let's talk a little bit about, okay, I feel like I could tolerate this risk myself. They seem willing to invest with me. Do we need to bring in, that third person to make sure it's a good deal or a fair deal, or at least to explain the terms to you?
Wow. Yes. Yes. Great question. Very interesting to look at it from the perspective of the promoter of the business, because by nature, when we're starting a business or building a business, we get very excited, like you said, like a little puppy chasing that bone. And when somebody throws us a little money, we tend to accept terms that later we realize that we shouldn't have. So we tend to be overly flexible with the terms and conditions when money is offered to us, because we're very optimistic. We think that everything's going to go perfect, that our plan is going to be executed immaculately, and that we're going to have no problem repaying. If we didn't have that positiveness, perhaps we wouldn't be entrepreneurs to begin with. So you have to be well balanced. You have to have a little pessimism. You have to be cautious when you raise capital and understand the terms. Speaking of attorneys, unfortunately, they are necessary in many cases. If we start with banks, obviously banks are not going to lend you a dime without a humongous loan package, a set of documents that it's incredibly detailed. They do this for a living. They've done this a million times, and they are protected in every which way you can imagine. As long as you pay it back, I always say I sign loan documents left and right every week for my different businesses. And I tell myself I rarely evaluate them in detail. Every now and then we'll do reviews and we'll check them and have our attorneys revise them. But I don't look at the fine print, because I tell myself as long as I pay it back, I very likely not going to find out all of the details incorporated into these loans.
Right.
If I don't pay it back, I'm going to find out all the horrible things that I just signed. So if you are as analytical as you need to be, and I do recommend it, you need to it's money well spent to hire someone that will read the document, understand it, interpret it, and give you their opinion. Where are the risk factors within a loan package, a loan document? So yes, use an attorney. I highly recommend it. Eventually, you start understanding more and more the concept of these loan documents and the number of documents that are involved in any given loan. For a partner is a little bit different, of course. The loan structure is different. There are partnership agreements. There are profit-sharing agreements. Sometimes there's not even an agreement. You simply create an entity where shares are distributed in whatever percentages were agreed upon. But it does make sense to bring a third party, a natural outsider that perhaps not only will review the documentation and interpret it for you, but may remind you. This is perhaps the most important part. Sometimes I bring attorneys. I bring my attorneys to help me out, not to read and interpret the document, but think of things that I may not be thinking, scenarios in which business can go wrong or something can go wrong. What would happen in that particular case? Theoretic, hypothetical scenarios, because you never know where business is going to go. What's going to happen? What are the variables that perhaps we're not thinking of? What would happen in a business in a case like that? So I do agree and support bringing in outside counsel, particularly when you haven't done a business repetitively. Eventually, you start perfecting the craft and even becoming somewhat, to a certain level, your own attorney. You start acquiring a certain comfort level as to what it is that you're okay to sign and okay without a whole lot of detailed revision, because you've gone through these documents over and over. And when there are terms and conditions that you might as well run them by someone else.
Yeah, so important. So thank you so much for breaking this down. Again, you want to look at your risk tolerance, where the money's coming from, their risk tolerance. And then, like you said, it's like timing and the right circumstances, the right amount, and having a good idea of what you're going to do with it. But from the very start of this, you said that really you're finding capital for growth. So your business you have to have a plan for it. And you mentioned business plan, you mentioned comfort level with people, running the business, right? If certain types of businesses, you have to give resumes of the officers and things like that to get money. So I think all the way through as you're growing and doing these things, you do become better and better at it. And thank you so much for breaking down the basics and giving these incredible pointers for us to consider when we are looking for that capital to grow.
Absolutely. And understand where you stand. Are you a startup? If you haven't proven your business or yourself as an entrepreneur, as an operator, you may have to give up a little more. But if you're able to do it alone for a certain amount of time and prove your concept, prove your business, maybe you have to give up a little bit less or a lot less just to raise capital to grow, because now you've proven that you know how to run your business. So the characteristics and the concept can change and it can evolve. The more you grow and the more you prove yourself and the more years you are in business, the less you have to give up percentage-wise in terms, because now you've proven to those investors that you can perform and execute the business properly.
Amazing. Where can people find you and connect with you and follow you and watch your exploits and the things that you do?
Yes, well, unfortunately, I do very, very little social media being after this subject. As you can tell, I spend way too much time working, but I do have my LinkedIn account with my name, Jose Berlanga, and joseberlanga.com is my website where I can be contacted. And hopefully I will be participating more, doing more videos and doing much more presentations and conferences to talk about all these different topics.
I love that. All right. So we're going to put the links down inside the show notes for LinkedIn and the website. And if you find us on the first day that this launches, or you find us a year later, you will be able to connect with Jose, follow him, and ask questions. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise and years of experience to our audience this week. It's an incredible conversation.
Thank you, Don. It's been great being here with you.
All right, we'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to donkennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube, as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.